Have you ever had the thought of being someone that you aren't? Whether that would be your sibling or someone new completely? What would you gain by doing this? Access to spaces, privilege, a whole new life? My name is Joan, and the concept I'm talking about is passing. Passing is when a person classified as a member of a racial group is accepted or perceived as a member of another. Historically, the term has been used primarily in the United States to describe a person of color or of a multiracial ancestry who assimilated into the white majority to escape the legal and social conventions of racial segregation and discrimination. Recently, I went to the library and I picked up a new book called The Personal Librarian. This follows Belle, the protagonist, as a Black passing woman who works as the personal librarian to JP Morgan. Basically, she starts to get higher up in the art/book world due to JP Morgan, and she fears that her real identity will be revealed. I read the synopsis, captivated, and I was just started reading, and I realized how much passing stories I have read in the last year. Not even read, but also watched. I watched Passing. I even started reading Passing. I read The Vanishing Half, which is my top 3 book of the year of last year. I read the synopsis of this book, and honestly, I was interested, and I realized how entranced I am when I hear that the concept of passing is a prominent part of a book or a movie. And I want to talk about that. In this video, I want to talk about the origins of passing. I want to talk about how the books and movies that I consumed in the last year have used the concept of passing in their stories. And I also want to talk about how passing is modernized in 2022 and how it looks very different than what it did in the 60s. I'm not claiming to be an expert on passing or an expert on colorism, racial ambiguity, because obviously I'm a dark-skinned woman. But also, as a dark-skinned woman, I have my own perception and my own experiences of how aspects of passing, even modernized in 2022, plays out and how there's a certain privilege to that. With that said, there is this one rule that predominantly affects more African American/Black people more often, and that is called the one drop rule, meaning a single drop of Black blood makes a person Black. This stems from Jim Crow and slavery times. This rule only applies to Black people and African American people because their facial features are more prominent than non-Black people, therefore less threatening. Passing was definitely more of a social phenomenon than a biological one. It definitely rests on this rule and people's beliefs of race and miscegenation. Whether someone passed in real life or in a story, there's definitely a duality in their identity. There's different modes of performance, whether you are with white people or you're with Black people. A lot of prominent things in these stories is that a person who's passing definitely knows that if a Black person spots them, they're done. There's also this privilege as well because they get to walk in these spaces, they get access to different items, personalities, different things, and it's very much like a factor of why someone would want to pass. Now, when it comes to passing, there are hard consequences, and there are 4 stories that I want to talk about, and so each story is going to cover a different consequence of passing. A loss of self, loss of family, loss of community, and the loss of the ability to answer the question, who are you? The Vanishing Half was one of my favorite books of last year. The synopsis of the story is of 2 twins who leave their hometown of Millard, Louisiana, and this town is filled of mostly light-skinned people, and they live 2 separate lives. One passes for white, and then one doesn't. 10 years later, one of them returns with a brown-skinned daughter, and this kind of starts the journey of their own daughters and their own relationship when it comes to the color and just the time that they're living in. With this story, I want to talk about the loss of family. The twins Desiree and Stella are from Millard, which is a town of mostly light-skinned people. Like, every single person is a light-skinned person. And there is a story that kind of backtracks how the person who started the town was a slave and he was like half white, half Black. Don't really remember. But that's basically how everyone is light-skinned. But the thing is that Desiree and Stella wanted something more from their lives besides this small-ass town. And trust me, I'm from a small town and I still live here and I want to leave. And so I get their aspect of leaving, But Stella has always been the type of person who does everything right. She is the good twin, and she's always just trying to look out for Desiree, while Desiree is the problem child. She's a rebel. She does whatever she wants. And when they both decide to make this decision, they live in Louisiana for about a year, and then they part ways unexpectedly when Stella just leaves. And it's very interesting because they're the only siblings they've ever had. And so when Stella decided to make the choice to leave and pass for white, it was after she applied to a department store and got the job. And it was because she passed for white. She realized at that moment all the chances and the different opportunity and life that she could have, so she just left. Now, with the loss of family in this story, Desiree and Stella were out of touch for decades. The only time when they got back together is when their mother died. And the craziest thing about this story that I really like is the fact that Desiree has a brown-skinned daughter and then Stella has a white daughter. Now, with this family, there's like a whole bunch more, themes of like maternal melodrama, and there's this heavy mother-daughter relationship. And honestly, that is a very common theme in these stories, let me tell ya. Desiree and Stella, their daughters actually meet in life because Desiree's daughter, who I cannot remember her name for the life of me, I think it's Erin? So Stella's daughter, her name is Kennedy, and Desiree's daughter is Jude, which I completely bushed. It's not Erin, because why would her name be Erin in the 60s? Anyway, so basically Kennedy and Jude meet because Jude knows about Stella and knows that she has a cousin out there. And it's very interesting because the consequence of family is very much a prominent thing when it comes to Stella, because she lives in this neighborhood in California with her husband, who's white, and her daughter. And when a black family comes to town, she does what she needs to kind of get rid of this family, but then she befriends them. And it's very interesting because it's like, how can you have a full family unit when you've been lying to them their entire time that they're with you? And that's why Stella has this great loss of family, because even in the end, she doesn't rekindle her relationship with Desiree. Her relationship with Kennedy is ruined, and by the time her husband finds out, he may or may not divorce her. She's not sure. And so that is a huge aspect and the consequence of passing in Stella's case, because she loses her family all around. The Vanishing Half is a great book. I cannot recommend it enough, and it's very interesting I'm talking about it because as I was reading it, I was like, I want to talk about this, but like, I'm not a light-skinned person, so I feel like I have to have some like sort of aspect of that. But also, I very much related to Jude because Jude is a brown-skinned girl like me, and so she definitely felt like the black sheep of her family. And she also wanted something more out of Millard because she realized how small the town was, how her and her uncle Arthur, I can't remember, but a guy that Desiree almost like they did hook up. Basically, how they weren't really going to go anywhere. And so she was like, I want more from my life. And she also wanted to find her aunt and her cousin. And so I very much related to that. I think also another consequence of the loss of family is on Jude as well, because she lost half of her family, like her aunt, her cousin, because Stella decided to pass. She also took away that chance to let her kid get to know, her niece and everything like that. So it's like these consequences are all around. It's not just affecting Stella. And I think it's just very interesting to look at. The next consequence we're going to talk about passing is the loss of community. And the story that I'm going to be talking about is Passing. And so Passing actually did come out maybe 2 months ago on Netflix. It is directed by Rebecca Hall and it stars Tessa Thompson and Ruth Negga. Passing was actually originally a book written in 1927 by Nella Larsen. And in this story, it is about two childhood friends that come back into contact after years of being apart, and once again, one passes for white and one doesn't. Now, it's actually very interesting because I started listening to the book on Audible. This is not sponsored, but hey Audible, if you ever want to sponsor me, I'm available. My DMs are open. I did watch the film when it did come out, and it's very interesting because the aspect of the consequence of passing is a loss of community. Now, in the book, which I don't remember hearing about in the movie, like I think they might have cut this, but In the book, the character of Claire leaves their hometown after her father dies in a brawl. Everyone in this town knows Claire, knows her father, and so once this happens, she leaves and no one really hears from her again. Now, Irene and Claire were friends, and they were longtime friends, and so she would consider her the closest to. So when they finally came into contact, they saw each other in Chicago. At first, Irene didn't even notice it was Claire. She couldn't even imagine. And it's very interesting because Claire immediately knew it was her. So now Irene's kind of having this inner monologue with herself, like, wow, like, you are obviously passing for a white woman. Like, what is your life like? And, you know, Claire has 2 boys, she's married, she's there on business, and it's very interesting hearing them catch up about what's going on in their lives and everything like that, because, you know, Irene has this little bit of uncomfortableness to her, because, you know, Claire is talking to her about old times, their old community, this, that, and the third, and then she has this aspect of like, it's very interesting how you leave our town and now you're all of a sudden want to reminisce, you want to be caught up, and Irene's just like, yeah, like, you know, it's kind of going. I'm assuming that Irene had a little bit more prominent standing in her neighborhood, in her town with Claire, and she kind of has that standing even with her husband, because they live in Harlem and they're like very prominent figures in their community. I know that Claire was talking to her about how like she like felt jealous about like the things that Irene had and the things like the life that she had, and so she thought to get that life she had to pass. So that's why she started passing in the first place. It's very interesting because from this encounter and another encounter when Irene meets Claire's husband, it's very interesting because Irene starts to build this resentment towards Claire. Claire just wants, you know, kind of wants this access to her and this access to this community when she's not even there. And so she feels like, well, you know, Irene was my friend, I can get that connection back. But Irene's like, you made your choice. You made your choice, and so you can stay with it. And it's very interesting to hear that inner monologue when I was listening to the book. Now, in the movie, it's very interesting because it's obviously shot in black and white, duh. And I know they totally used freaking 16mm film, like, oh my God, it's so great. And so to hear this encounter with the husband and then seeing it, because the husband's ironically played by Alexander Skarsgård, which is very interesting. Like, I think it's a very poignant choice, at least casting wise. In this specific scene, her husband, I don't remember his name, we'll call him Cliff because he looks like one. Basically, he comes in and a little nickname that he has for his wife is Nig. Yes, a nickname for the N-word, because he's just like, well, you know, like, my wife can never be an N-word. Like, she doesn't look like it, you know, like the dumb fool he is. And obviously, Irene is shocked, appalled, and does not want to be there anymore. And it's quite funny because he's having this whole conversation in front of this black woman. He's just like, yeah, I don't like black people. I don't care for black people. Like, all I've heard about how they rob and loot and do all this stuff to their own people, like, I don't really like them. To a black woman, sitting next to a black woman, unbeknownst to him. In the book, she obviously is very uncomfortable. Like, she's just like, I don't understand how Claire can bring me around this mess and think that I'm just gonna let her be my friend. Like, this is very interesting. And so, as the story goes on, Claire writes Irene letters, like letting her know, I'm alone, I feel so alone, I like want some aspect of your life. And it's very interesting because as the movie goes on, Claire starts coming around. She starts coming around a lot more, going to these type of events. It's very interesting. And in the film, Irene has a conversation with a prominent white author who's like very big in their community, like they like know him somehow. And basically she's explaining to him how Claire is able to pass because Claire is dancing with Irene's husband. And he's looking at her like, that woman's white, right? And she's just like, no, look at her facial structures. Like, look, really look. It's like, oh my God, like I wouldn't have known. And it's just very interesting because now she's become this kind of like new figure in a way. Cause like she kind of just came out of nowhere. And like, I think it's alluded that all the black people in their like friend group or the people that she's around knows that she's black. Like they know she is, but they're obviously not going to say anything. And so it's very getting interesting because Irene in some way is getting jealous of Claire, because not only that, Claire and it seemed like Irene's husband are getting a little close for Irene's liking, if you ask me. In a way, she's kind of like jealous of her because she's just like, You don't get to pass for white and then try and come back into my community and steal my friends, steal my aspect, try to bank off what I've built. I've been in this community, I've made these relationships, and you're just kind of come back and just be like, oh, let me just scoot right on in, and you get to pass for white. Like there's just this building resentment. And it's just very interesting because, you know, up until this encounter, Claire has definitely had this like loss of community. And I feel like for Irene, in a way, I guess the loss of community doesn't really apply to Irene because she has this community, but she also just has this growing resentment for Claire. So if she wanted any sort of community from her, it's like nowhere to be found. And it's very interesting because, spoiler alert, at the end, Claire dies. I'm still kind of torn on the ending because the way that it's shot, it makes it seem like that she fell out the window or Irene pushed her. Now, the way that's angled, not really sure. And so it's just very interesting because it's like, did Irene push her because she didn't want her anymore? She didn't want her there anymore? Or did Claire push herself off because she just didn't want to deal with the repercussions of her actions?
I guess we'll never know.
The next consequence of passing that I would like to talk about is the loss of self. Now, you can have the argument that every single story of passing is going to have a loss of self because it's to do with identity and everything like that. But I want to talk about the Imitation of Life movie. But I want to talk about how Imitation of Life, the 1959 version, kind of takes this consequence of passing to like a whole nother level. I remember watching this film for my women and gender studies class when I was a junior in college. During this time, we were doing a section on melodrama, and this movie kind of tackles maternal melodrama. So the synopsis of Imitation of Life is about Laura, a white mother, who has a white daughter. Her name is Susie. She loses her at the beach, and then she meets Annie. Annie is a black mom with a very, very light-skinned passing daughter. Her name is Sarah Jane. So basically, Annie needs a place to live with Sarah Jane, and they're kind of going from place to place looking for a job. And so Laura's like, yeah, like you can totally live with me and we can totally like work this out. So essentially Annie becomes a mammy and basically takes care of Susie and her own daughter while Laura decides to go out and get her dreams of being an actress. And so she basically gets with this dude. He writes a whole bunch of plays. She stars in these plays for a decade. So a decade goes by. She has this big house and they're all living together. Like, it's very interesting because it's almost like Annie is like a maid, but in a way kind of not, because like her and Laura do things together, like they're friends, like they're best friends. They live together, they support each other, they support their daughters. Like, it's very interesting because like it definitely crosses that line between like employer and employee, because it kind of starts out that way, but as the film goes, it doesn't seem that way. But at the same time, there's aspects of it. And so basically I want to talk about the loss of self when it comes to the character of Sarah Jane. Sarah Jane is so light-skinned, she really can pass. And that's what she did when she was a kid. Now, when she was a kid and she was at school, she would pass for white. And so when her mom came in to give her, you know, her rain jacket and rain boots, she was so dramatic and literally ran out of the classroom and did not want to deal with that. And even her teacher was just like, I don't have any colored children here. She's like, no, this is my daughter. And the daughter was so embarrassed, she like yeeted out. Okay, basically Sarah Jane has this identity issue starting from when she was a kid about being white, about being black. And I think it's very interesting because Annie never fully talked about it with her. Like, throughout this whole movie, like all these incidents will come up and Annie didn't even sit once and be like, hey, I know you look lighter than your average black person, but that does not mean you are not any less black. She didn't do that. And so Sarah Jane is having the biggest identity crisis of her life, her whole life. For instance, when her and Susie are playing at home and Susie's like, look at my dolls. And she gives her the black one. She's like, I don't want the black one. And then takes the white one. That's Susie's favorite. And then Susie's like, she took it from me. And then Sarah Jane's like, I don't want a black doll. I don't want to be black. And I'm like, oh, okay. She has this thing. And then I wrote in my notes the blood incident, but there was a blood incident where Sarah Jane pricks Susie's finger or arm or something and to bleed because she thinks that a white person's blood is different from a black person's blood. And Annie just look at that and she's like, oh, they're just playing around. What? And clearly Sarah Jane is dealing with a whole bunch of adult themes in her life And her mom's just like, whoop-de-doo-de-doo. So then they get older, right? And Sarah Jane's like, I'm living my life, I'm being cool, whatever. And she gets a boyfriend, and her boyfriend is white. And she tells Susie, obviously, but Susie asks if her boyfriend's colored. And of course, Sarah Jane take offense to that. She's like, why are you asking if he's colored? And she's just like, well, because you hang out with them. Like, they're in. She's like, no, don't ever say that. My boyfriend is white because I'm white. And Susie's just like, I don't know, man. Because Susie's just, she don't know because her mother abandoned her. Anyway, Sarah Jane lives her white life. And a consequence of this white life is that her boyfriend beats the shit out of her when he finds out that she's black. She blames her mom because she's like, you're black. I don't want you to be my mom. And this whole time, Annie's just like, I don't know what to do. And it's like, talk to your daughter, but you don't want to do that because you're too busy taking care of Susie, because Laura's too busy making the money and being not the greatest mom. Sarah Jane just like leaves. She's just like, you know what? I'm gonna live my life as a white person. And obviously Annie has a big problem with that because she's just like, that's not who you are. And it's very interesting because the mirror imagery. Okay, I'm gonna find a clip of this. There's just one specific scene which I think is very interesting, is that Laura or Annie would ask mostly Sarah Beth to help with like chores and stuff, or like simple things that like a maid would do, but doesn't ask Susie. Annie asked Sarah Beth to take a plate out to Laura and some executive she's talking to, and she pulls out this whole mammy little accent get up or whatever, and then Laura came in, you know, tore her ass up and like, what the fuck you doing? And he's like, yeah, I heard her. And then so Laura's just like, I didn't never treat you any different when I met you. You've been in my life this whole time. I ain't treating you no different, so I don't know why you acting this way. And basically she's like kneeling down and she's like talking to her mother. She's like, I'm sorry, you'll just never understand. And this has nothing to do with passing, but this is just a good film moment. Later in the movie, when Laura and Susie are butting heads because Susie's just like, you're gone all the time, you don't understand my life, you're not here, it's the same thing. She goes off on her, and then Susie kneels at her and says, I'm sorry, you'll never understand. That was a good film moment. I just had to say that because the imagery, the symbolic symbolism. Time after time, Sarah Jane leaves, and then Annie chases after her, you know, essentially blowing up her life because she's just like, you have to be who you are, like you know. And you know, Annie did have to come to a point where it's like, okay, obviously you don't want to be who you are, so I guess I'll just have to not be around. And so yeah, that was it. They part ways, and of course, you know, Annie's just sick over it. She's so sick she literally dies at the end. And it's very interesting because Sarah Beth has wanting to keep this herself white so much to the point where she literally cuts off everyone in her life, including her mom, who's been there through everything. But also Annie does acknowledge that she did not do her part to really explain her daughter's identity or tried to help her understand her own identity, and she played a part in that and she accepted it. So in the end, you know, at the funeral, beautiful funeral, Sarah Beth comes in the streets wailing, saying, I'm sorry, I wanted to come home. And it's like, I get that aspect of being selfish, that you want to acknowledge yourself and what you want, but for Sarah Beth, she wanted to be white so bad that it literally costed her mother. I've been wanting to talk about this movie ever since I seen it. It's really, I don't know, I like it, and I don't really like old movies like that. I really don't. So it kept me entertained. All right, so the last consequence I'm going to talk about passing, and the last story I'm going to talk about, is the Personal Librarian. And that consequence is the loss of the ability to talk about who you are. So I guess you're like the loss of legacy in a way. And so I'm still reading this book, so this analysis part's going to be a little bit shorter. But essentially, a big chunk though is important, because in this book, Belle is a librarian and she starts working for JP Morgan. And Belle is the daughter of the first Black graduate of Harvard, of her dad. And her mom is also Black too, but she's lighter skinned. Even though she is very proud of her father, proud of his accomplishments, and how she's even taken like the book smart aspects of his personality and like learning, her mom is like, no, you should just be a teacher and not like doing other stuff. And it's her mom that pushes her to be white. Her mom put their whole family down as white on the census. And when her father found out, he left because her mom's like, I did what I did and I'll do it again. I think the interesting part is that we get a little bit into Belle's psyche because, you know, as she's working for JP Morgan, she's meeting all these prominent people and she's getting up in this world. She's just like, she thinks about how her father would think of her, because her father has never not been proud about who he is. He's proud of his work. He works with the, you know, the NAACP. He works for Black liberation, and she knows that deep down he would be very disappointed in her. And so when the news come that that her father actually remarries and lives in Japan with a Japanese wife, she's very hurt because, you know, she thought there would be a little bit ounce of her parents getting back together, a little bit, but no, it does not. And it's very interesting too because Belle is the third oldest in a family of 5 or 6. So she also feels like her passing for white is this opportunity to help her family because she does make, you know, a little bit of money that helps towards the family. It's not like she doesn't want to pass. Like, there's a part of her that does, but there's also a part of her that really doesn't, because she only feels like she's doing it out of the necessity of her family. Now, it's very interesting because now when she looks back at her legacy for family, you know, it says white, but it's not, because, you know, she can do so much better things. You know, she has a prominent father figure who's in her life, who supports her, who shows her what a good academic, what a good scholar could be. And then her mother's just like, no, we're just going to pass for white because we're just going to do what we need to do to get ahead. And her father's just like, but what about the Black experience? What about the Black liberation? Why not work hard for us? Why do we have to pretend to be something that we're not? And it's very interesting to see Belle grapple with that, and I'm very excited to keep reading and see how the ending turns out, because do I think Belle's gonna get caught? Absolutely, because in some way or not, someone who's passing is going to get caught, or a big consequence going to happen because of it. And to me, it's either she dies or she just gets fired from her job. Like, that's really it. Those are the really two, like, predictions that I have for this book. But I think it's very interesting how this book tackles the aspect of legacy. Now, this last portion of the video is just going to be kind of like a ramble in a way, because I mean, I do have some notes here, but also I do want to talk about some aspect of passing and how it's definitely changed in 2022, because in the 60s, people wanted to pass to look white, and now people want to pass to look Black. And I think it's very interesting how much the tables have turned. I can't talk about passing, especially as Black, without talking about the example to end all examples, Rachel Dolezal. Now, if you were under a rock between the years, I think it was 2017, 2018, I don't remember. It was the late 2010s. And basically, there's this woman named Rachel Dolezal who was the president of the Seattle chapter of the NAACP in Washington. And come to find out, this woman was not Black. She was white. It's very interesting because then there was this whole thing about being transracial and blackfishing, or having the racial ambiguity. This is like the example to use because everyone knew, all the Black people knew that she was not Black. We all knew. And it's very interesting because people want to be Black so bad nowadays. Like, they want the experience of Blackness. They want the culture. They want the AAEV. They want the hair. They want the clothing. They want every aspect of it, but they don't want the problems. And that is the thing about passing in 2022, because Black culture is mainstream. That is what it is these days. I just think it's very interesting to think about passing in that aspect, because like I said, the aspect of blackfishing, which was a whole thing again in the late 2010s, like 2018 to like 2017, more like 2016 to 2020, where like a whole bunch of white women were pretending to be Black, or a whole bunch of non-Black people were trying to be racially ambiguous so it doesn't seem like they're white. Like, their proximity to whiteness was getting away from them, but at the same time, when they needed to, they can always go back to it and use it when they need to. And that's always been the problem with passing for Black, you know, because again, y'all want the goods, but you don't want the problem. It's so aggravating, especially as a dark-skinned person, a dark-skinned Black woman, mind you, because I will never ever get this privilege. I mean, yeah, passing is a privilege, but like, I will never get that privilege. And it's very interesting to read these stories and like know that I will never pass. And the thing is, I don't want to pass for white. I like being black. I love being Haitian. I love this aspect of myself. And the older I get, I'm very much seeping into that. I'm trying to do more. I'm trying to learn more for the community, for myself, and define my own definition of blackness. And I just think it's very interesting. I just think what's more ironic is how things have flipped. Like how in the 60s, people really want to pass for white for better opportunities, but now people want to pass for black just for aesthetics. They don't want to, because white people know how black people and other POC are treated. They know, because Miss Jane Elliott, if y'all don't know who Jane Elliott is, she's a prominent psychologist in the 60s who did a brown eye, blue eye project where basically teaches segregation and discrimination. Like, if you've taken any base psychology class, you know who Jane Elliott is. Jane Elliott is the ultimate ally. She's the ultimate ally because she knows that white people know how black people and other people of color are treated in the world, and they don't want to be treated that way. Time after time, where we see all these scandals about prominent social media personalities, celebrities, freaking presidents being racist, have these microaggressions towards people, it's because we know. Like, we're not dumb. It's just, I don't know, it's just very interesting to look at these stories and see how, like, the concept of passing is just, like, opposite. I don't know. I guess now that I'm really, like, talking about it and really thinking about it, it really gets me. And it should really amaze you, because as a dark-skinned woman, I will, like, as much as I work hard, the system is just against me, and we need a new system. In conclusion, that is why I'm obsessed with passing stories. Am I still going to keep reading / watching these type of stories? Yes, and I will continue to critique these. Again, I like to say I am not an expert on any of this. This is just my own experience and my own analysis of what I've seen, taking some sort of history and kind of just meshing it into a video. I think the aspect of this concept and these stories do make me think about my own blackness in a way, and makes me think about, like, how I want people to perceive me, or how I want to bring myself to people, because, like, obviously I'm more than just my skin color, but at the same time, I know that my skin color is important to who I am, because, again, I love being black, I love being Haitian, and I wouldn't change it for the world. I would not change it for the world. You shouldn't either. You shouldn't have to strive to be someone else that you're not for whatever reason, because in the end, you have to live your life for you. And just know that one day it's not going to be as important. It's not. Wow, it has been so long since I filmed a video, and I'm very excited. This is definitely gonna be a blooper, but thank you so much for watching this video. This took me a while to get together because I was, like, constantly researching and adding more points, and this took me a while to get, so I'm like, oh my god, like, I hope I get everything, but it's okay. I'm just really glad I'm getting this video out. I've been reading and I've just been researching, and I'm so excited to do more videos like this, or just do more video type essay, like do more videos that are kind of like video essays, but kind of like my own opinions, and just doing more film critique and film theory into videos. I'm very excited. So thank you so much for watching, and I'll catch you guys in the next one.